Hey, Mindful Millionaire community. Today I am having an interview with my good friend Jason Vitug. He is on fire. He's got a new book coming out, but we're talking about relationship with money, one of my favorite topics, talking about the evolution that both of us have gone through over this past 9, 10 years as we became business owners. He was pretty much the first person I met in the internet world. And we've been friends ever since. And so this conversation is really fun. It talks about the philosophy of looking inside of your relationship with money and so much more. Enjoy. Hello and welcome. I'm so happy, Jason, that you're here again joining me.
So excited to be here. It's been some time. It definitely has been some time.
Yeah, well, we've got this like weaving path all the way back. You were one of the first people, actually, like the first person in the internet world that I met after I started my business, probably April, May, I don't know, something like that, 2014. And yet here we are. There's been so much that has happened since that time. Isn't that crazy? Like 9 years.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's been a decade. We made a connection online, we turned it offline, and our paths, like what you mentioned, just weaves in and out. And so whenever we connect and whenever we catch up, it's amazing how much of our paths are very similar in where we are. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. I'm so excited to talk to your growing community and just your evolution, transformation. And it's been amazing to watch.
Well, right back at you. For those who are new to Jason, Jason is a wellness advocate, best-selling author, entrepreneur, producer, founder of the financial wellness website frugal.com, and a friend and a person who has answered all those questions along the way that you never know who can answer them, and yet there you are. You've helped me, you've inspired me. You did the talk at FinCon together the first time back in 2014. That was hilarious. I got everyone to meditate in a bar. I'm like, put down your drinks. I'm just gonna get you to meditate for a few minutes, which was absolutely crazy. Good thing I didn't know better. And you gave this super inspiring talk about your journey that would later become part of your first book, You Only Live Once, right?
Yeah, it's just really amazing just how this journey has unfolded. And what you talk about, just putting ourselves in these really uncomfortable places and just allowing stuff to unfold and kind of pushing our own self-imposed limits. And so I remember how nervous you were about doing this meditation in a crowded, busy bar. And everyone, I want you to understand it was jam-packed, it was so loud. And I had 100% confidence that Lisa was going to get everyone into this meditation zone, and she did, and she rocked it. People quieted down, and I'm sure people wondered what is going on because this is the quiet. And I think you had them silent for about 3 to 4 minutes because the talk was about 5 minutes long. And I remember some of the feedback of the bloggers and creators that were there approaching you saying how awesome that was, that they were able to take that 2 to 3 minutes to be present, and other people giving you kudos just for the fact that you got hundreds of people in the bar to basically be quiet. And so how inspirational was that?
That was one of those moments where I'm like, I don't know if I can ever do this again, but I am celebrating the present moment that it actually happened. So when you were there with me, I was like, Jason, I don't know what's about to happen. But yeah, you have done amazing things over this time. And one of the things that I'd love to talk about first is the evolution of your relationship with money. So, taking you back to you started your business before me, maybe a year or so, but
Mhm.
like coming into starting blogging and sharing about money all the way to today, like what would you say has been that biggest transformation and why?
I think the biggest transformation has been realizing that the relationship with money continues to evolve as my life changes and also how the world changes. And so for me, I thought I had it all figured out. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I'm letting it all out, that there was a point where I was really messy with money. That's how it started. That's how my first talk started at that bar, where I thought I had it all figured out and I ran into credit card debt, I had student loan debt, but I was making good income. So I can make payments on pretty much all the bills, but I wasn't necessarily thinking about my future. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And then eventually realizing that I wanted something a bit more, and money was limiting me because I was using money to make purchases as opposed to utilizing money as a tool to find my purpose in life. And so when I had an opportunity to grow in my career in the banking industry and get more money and a fancier title, I decided to leave. And many of you might have heard that first interview where I left and I backpacked around the world and I found a sense of purpose, which was to help others. And so here I am. When we met, I became this financial wellness person, this advocate going around the country talking about health and wealth, because I knew that it was important to discuss our relationship with money, not just the financial calculations, but how that affects our mental, emotional, and physical well being. And so I didn't realize I found myself caught in the hustle trap. And I think that has a lot to do with being a high functioning, high achieving individual who I like to tell everyone now that I was a high functioning financial mess. So I can achieve a lot of things, but often at the cost of not really paying attention to the nuts and bolts details of my finances. And eventually those things will catch up. And so as I was climbing up this entrepreneurial ladder, as opposed to the corporate ladder, I was reaching all these goals and people were congratulating me. And I was still making mistakes with money. I was hiring the wrong people. I was not really into the nuts and bolts of the finances. And so that eventually caught up with me. And I found myself, I started this journey when we met as a financially secure, independent, early retiree to a bankrupt entrepreneur. Finding all the things that I've worked so hard for just being taken away from me because of the fact I made these mistakes. And I really had to take a hard look at my actual relationship with money. And it wasn't that I didn't understand how to calculate expenses and income, or how I couldn't curb my appetite for spending or using credit cards. It wasn't that. I knew the mechanics of personal finance. What I didn't realize and what I uncovered was how I was overcompensating for some of the traumas and some of the things that I experienced as a child, and how I was using money to basically make me feel better about my situation. And I was using accomplishments to show others how I was doing. And so all that kind of played a role into repeating the financial messiness that I got myself out of. And so with that, I've done a lot of work. And that's why I've also disappeared from the space to do a lot more of the internal work to kind of uncovering the root issues of why I was making these issues and these mistakes. And one of the key things that I learned from myself was, sure, financial stress for me was causing a lot of mental distress, but then it was an aha moment realizing my mental health issues was actually affecting my financial behaviors that was causing the financial stress, the inverse relationship. And I hadn't put two and two together. And that was just that aha moment to go, oh, there's something more work I need to do to figure out why I'm utilizing money in a specific way that's not allowing me to heal and move forward. And so that's where I am today, in a more healthier, wealthier, and happier version of myself when it comes to my relationship with money. And that had a lot to do with the work that you do, like looking at the root issues of these past situations, and how can we utilize them for what I call, like, what a lot of psychologists and others and myself, I use post-traumatic growth, and that fueled me to success. But also I needed to figure out what needed to change.
I love that you say that this journey continues, because what came to mind for me was the business Wealth Clinic grew really fast in the past couple years, and to multiple six figures. And one of the things that I had been doing with managing money was everything was through Google spreadsheets, and I wasn't using a bookkeeping software, and it worked for me at the time. But when you get into multiple six figures and you've got all these different people you're paying, my right hand person was like, we really need some software. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And oh gosh, so we hired a bookkeeper, and she fired me like within 3 weeks. And I couldn't get her to say why, but the situation was kind of complicated. Now I realize I was pissed. I was like, I'm a money coach. You can't fire me. Like, well, we can work through this. Like, what's your issue? I got this. But it turned out to be a godsend, because I ended up realizing that if I couldn't explain things to her, then how the heck could I understand what was going on? And so this past year has been Lisa and the Wave app bookkeeping system. I mean, I have gotten so intimate with these numbers and the tracking of it and the understanding. And when you do something like what I've done, not necessarily, I would at this point recommend it, because I'm making such different choices by having that level of understanding that I had to get by going over those numbers again and again. And am I entering them right? And the businesses we run, for anyone who doesn't understand, you've got credit cards coming in from 3 different sources that have their own financial platform combined with your checking account and a credit card, and making sure that they all cohabitate correctly and accurately is way ridiculously complicated. Like, I didn't know how complicated I had created it. And now I'm so empowered, because I'm like, we were able to raise like all that money through the work that we do, like really owning that money. But also on the other side of truly understanding the expenses and the things that are going on. And so I'm curious if that brings anything up for you. But I just feel like, talk about continuing to evolve. Like, there you go, folks.
Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I hired a finance person to help me as my business continued to grow. I made more money in 2 years than I probably made in the lifetime of working in my career. Everything looked great in terms of the income that was coming in, and we were covering our expenses, but also not being intimate with the details of the finances, and also realizing that sometimes, me choosing the employee based on my gut instinct probably isn't the right approach when running a business, and me being very heart and spiritually focused when I work with individuals. I realized that they also needed to have a good financial scent, because they were doing stuff with the money that were filtered to different places and things like that. So it was a painstaking work to unravel. And then finding, I think one of like the aha moments for me was when I got a letter in the mail that I was being sued for non-payment of a bill. And I'm like, what is happening? And at the same time this was happening, both my parents were in the hospital. They checked into the hospital for health issues, and so everything felt like it was just weighing down on me. And eventually, it was like, okay, well, what's the one thing I can't control? My parents' health. What's the one thing I can control? I can control my finances. So I let go of my finance guy. I went through the books, figured it all out. I was able to work out a deal with the company that was suing me, and so we didn't have to go. I didn't have to appear in court for this. And so like things just started unraveling, and then I was going, wait, I am quote unquote a money expert making a lot of financial mistakes, and quote unquote an entrepreneur making a lot of business mistakes. What is going on? And so I had to realize, oh wow, these are other labels I've affixed on myself. And so let me let go of that and focus on the actual problem. And so going in and realizing how complex I did make things up. Like, I also had systems in place, but systems on top of systems on top of systems. And then I had to look at it from an outside point of view and go, if someone were to purchase this business away from me and have it live on as part of my legacy, how can it make it easier for them? And I go, okay, I have to reimagine how everything is operating, how everything is working. And so there was a reboot that took place, and now things are running smoother and things like that. But I did have that aha moment, and I think it has a lot to do with so many different pieces, so many different parts.
Yeah. Well, this what I'm suggesting in my work and through my book is, let's get almost like a forensic scientist to understand what's the root cause of, what's happening. And I think for me, it cracks me up because I may be like sitting on that meditation cushion and like, oh, I'm good. It's awesome. Everything's great. And meanwhile, there's this thing out there that I'm not applying that same level of due diligence to, and realizing that it's okay, that we evolve, that we grow, and that I love this idea of like dropping away the labels of like, I'm a money coach or I've got this figured out, and being okay with the fact that you are on a journey and that wherever you are is okay. The question is are you going backwards or are you
Mhm.
going forwards? Are you truly open to growth? Are you vulnerable enough to see the things that maybe you're missing? Because we get that steel armor around us and we're just shut down, we're closed. And I think money is a place where people get shut down and closed, I think, a lot. And that leads me into talking about your books, right? The first book you wrote, tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us why you decided to go and do this horrible, painful process again.
Yet joyful.
I
Yeah,
know, I'm just
so
making
writing the
fun.
book, yeah, writing a book is extremely hard, and getting the book to the hands of the people that need it is even harder. And I think all of you writers out, you understand this process. So my first book, You Only Live Once: The Roadmap to Financial Wellness and a Purposeful Life. That book I wrote because I wanted people to understand that time was the most valuable resource you possess, and time is both an asset and a liability. So it's an asset in terms of we exchange it for money because money is woven into society and we need it to survive. But it's also a liability because it is given to us, it's borrowed, and it's we have to repay it back. And I look at it as repaying it back with a life well lived. And so the whole premise is that we can enjoy today while we're planning for a better tomorrow, and that money is essential for us. Mastering money and utilizing as a tool will help us kind of honor the time that we're given, hence YOLO. And so I wanted to write the second book back in 2016 when my first book was out and my publisher had requested a second book. And so I said I want to talk about mental emotional health as it relates to money. And Lisa, can I tell you, they're like, you can't do that. You think money is a taboo subject? Talking about mental health, talking about emotions, that's even harder. And I'm like, well, I spoke about mental and emotional well being in my book. I am the thoughts and feelings guy when it comes to money. And they're like, well, you're about to break open something that we cannot talk about. And there's no demand for it. So I said, I will not write a second book until I can write this book. And lo and behold, we go through the pandemic, the quarantine, the world has shifted, the conversations have shifted. And interestingly enough, one of the most one of the most fascinating thing that happened was I get a call from the publisher and said, "Remember that book you wanted to write years ago? Well, there's a demand for it and would like to talk to you." And so this was an opportunity for me to get this book that I've been writing for a few years now, since 2016. And they got the first drafts and they absolutely loved it. and said, we need to get this out into the world. And it was supposed to be released about a year and a half later from my final manuscript subscription. But because we wanted to be first to market and to get, and I'm excited to get this work out, it's being released basically a year before it was slated to. And so everything is condensed, and so you could see on the business side, there's a lot of logistics and stressful situations that can happen with that. And uh but the genesis was, I wanted to share my evolution, what we talked about the relationship with money, and how this is truly a journey. You might think you have it all figured out, and then curveballs are thrown. And so for me, realizing the health issues of my parents and me becoming a caretaker, the caregiver for them, that wasn't in my plan. So I had to reevaluate how my finances and how my life was going to evolve. Me, all of us experiencing the quarantine and the pandemic, we just realized that, yes, it's true. There's some things we can control, but there are many more things we can't control, such as the world around us. And so the world is changing. My personal life is changing. My body is aging. And so all these things culminated into me wanting to have a more dimensional conversation when it came to money. And so that's how I wrote Happy Money, Happy Life, a multi-dimensional approach to health, wealth, and financial freedom. And the whole premise here is to show people, and you have this with your I Prosper program, is that we are multidimensional, we're multifaceted, we're multi-layered. And the reason why at times where we think we have it all together but something is missing, well, that's because a dimension is kind of lacking attention. And these dimensions are your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, social, occupational, environmental, and financial. And in the book, I weave money into these dimensions and show you how it's impacting them negatively and how you can impact them positively. And it's a one of a kind in terms of just sharing my personal story, uncovering these wellness dimensions, and utilizing it to live that healthier, wealthier, and happier lifestyle.
I think that you have said it, but I'd love to just ask this question again. What do you think this book does differently than other books out there? Like what was that?
So one of the key things I've noticed is that I looked at this book as a happiness book, because when I've had conversations on the road, and when my first question I always ask is, how do I bring more joy and happiness into my life? It's never about how can I achieve financial milestones. And so what this book does differently in terms of money is that this front and center is how you can choose happiness by utilizing money in ways where you impact your actual wellness. So these are specific, tactical, actionable ways for money to buy happiness by spending on wellness. So I'll give you an example. Mental health. I talk about it as mental resilience. And a lot of that has to do with focusing on a growth mindset. Well, how does a person attain a growth mindset? And that is using your money to invest in workshops, to invest in coaches, to invest in university degrees, just attaining more knowledge. Because what happens, and all the research that I've included in the book, so it's not just me, there's a lot of scientific research done. All the research for mental health and mental resilience deals with the fact that the more knowledge or the more data or experiences that you give your brain, the more equipped it is to process information differently. So if you're constantly having the same type of experiences, if you're constantly reading the same type of material, you're not exposing yourself to something new, you're not having different, you're going to look at your situation the same way every single time. And so how do you utilize money on those things that I mentioned that allows your brain to get new data inputs so it can process a situation differently?
Yeah, this is interesting. I work with a lot of women who had a thriving career in one area, and then they got really burnt out, and then they decided to maybe start a business or try something different. And that second chapter isn't going so well. It's very challenging to be a business owner. It's very hard to put yourself out there. It's hard when you haven't been raised, with the internet or with social media to all of a sudden figure out what's actually happening here and how do I do that in this new business that I'm trying to grow. And so there's a lot of challenges there. And I remember when I was a financial advisor, actually, maybe when I was a mortgage banker, I had a client who was quite well off. And I think it was a combination of things, but she was in her late 80s. And she told me that she had reached that second chapter in her 50s and realized she had not gone to college. And she was drawn to starting a new career. And she, I think 56, entered college, finished at 60, and started a whole new chapter to her life. Ultimately, I think fell in love and, met someone who had a lot of wealth. And so it was fascinating though, but she's like, none of that would have happened. Like where I am and how well off I am today was because of those choices that I had made, in midlife when many people would, especially back then, right? Because this is a person, she was in her late 80s and this is in the mid to like 2004 or five. So think about the time when she was born and what her life had looked like. It was not a big deal to not have a college degree, but she made that choice. And I think that when, I always want to think about people who are struggling, like I don't have enough money to retire. I don't know. You're talking, Jason, about happy life, happy money, but I don't even know how that's possible because I don't have enough money to make it for the next 30 or 40 years. And I just want to echo what you said about staying open to new possibilities. And even though there's this idea of business ownership being this utopian, like Shangri-La place that you go to, like for a lot of people, it isn't. Maybe it's going back into the workforce, but in a different line. Maybe you were here, but you go there, and it's more yin versus the yang that you were, experiencing in your previous career. But how can we keep ourselves open to possibilities? And it sounds like in your book, you're encouraging people to open their the growth mindset, make sure that they're actually living with a growth mindset, and then how that can affect one's happiness as we move forward.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, that is one aspect of the book when we're focusing on mental health, which is it's the chapter I called Happy Mind. And in Happy Mind, it really is that growth aspect of it. And so when I want to kind of piggyback on your statement about people in midlife trying to figure out what the next stage of life is, I've interviewed countless numbers of people who've reinforced the idea that we get to live multiple lives in one lifetime. So you don't have to settle on one path, that you can have multiple paths. And I think that is so freeing. But understanding that your financial situation allows you to kind of take the twists and turns and the ups and downs a bit more gracefully is probably the word that I'll use. And so I'd like to share another dimension, which is the social wellness, which is I call happy social. And so individuals who are looking to affect their mental health because they're going through some difficulties or they want to just change their situation and they're starting with mental health, well, also, they may be able to lean into their social well-being. If they're strong in friendships and connections and colleagues, there are people that might introduce them to practices that help them with their mental health. And so that's one of the things that I advise individuals as well. If you find it challenging to shift your mindset, but you have this awesome social network and this community around you, find the people who are doing the things that you want to do: meditation, yoga, breath work, retreats, reading books, and lean into that social health, that strength in your dimension to support your mental growth. And so one of the things that I like to share is that when you're trying to figure out, okay, my finances aren't exactly where I need them to be to make these changes that we're talking about. Well, that's one of the differences of this book, sharing the 8 dimensions of wellness, how they're overlapping, intersecting, and how you focusing on one area will have a ripple effect on others. And so if you're thinking that finances is the sole root issue of why you're suffering mentally, why you're unable to express yourself emotionally, why you're feeling physical ailments, or you feel the spiritual void, we can then focus on what specific financial issues are preventing you from becoming financially well. They could be your income, they could be your debt, they could be a whole host of other reasons. And then there are tactical ways to address those things. But from my personal example, having those tactical ways to address those things without realizing the mental, the emotional, the physical, well, that's all going to ripple back, and then all of a sudden you're going to find yourself back in that same financial predicament. And so it's about understanding that you have these 8 wellness dimensions, knowing that they do affect one another, and how you can address kind of like the area that needs the most attention. And so sometimes, and I shared with a story of a friend, he needed to focus on his physical health. He was so focused on financial health and professional, which is happy work. He was so focused on the career and focused on the money that it was taking a toll on his physical health. And guess where all the money that he was making was going? To address the medical issues he was facing. And guess what happened to the work he prided himself on? Well, his work eventually was being affected, and he no longer felt the sense of accomplishment that he wanted. And so the root issue there was the physical ailments he was experiencing. But after talking about the dimensions, he realized he had some mental issues that he needed to address, which was the stress that was causing all the mental gymnastics that we do that that manifests itself physically. And that eventually was leading to that ripple effect. And him being able to connect every single piece made him realize, I need to address the mental stress aspect of it. Yes, part of it was work, but a lot of it had to do with his home life, and he needed to address the home life issues in order for him to relieve his mind of that stress, which then allowed him to start healing physically and then become present for his work, which is the main source of his income. And so there are these areas that we can all focus on, and the unique thing is realizing how money can make that happen. And in this situation, his financial health allowed him to be able to leave that toxic relationship. So that independence allowed him to leave that toxic relationship, which then afforded him the opportunity to start healing in all those other dimensions.
I love it. Yeah, I can really see how, kind of like how I've used the chakras, you're using this as a compass to kind of help us guide ourselves on the journey, checking to make sure that certain areas of our life are in alignment, because we do have this understanding, Jason and I both, around the consideration of wholeness. And if we see ourselves as a whole rather than fragmented parts just kind of laying out there on the street, then we have a very different way that we go about our lives. We're like, well, one thing affects everything, so and each thing affects the whole, but I am whole, and why do I not feel whole? And then going down that journey. So it sounds like these different parts of the book help us to explore these aspects that are the composition of the whole.
Hmm. Absolutely. And that's why, like, I wanted to have this conversation with you, because it's a conversation we've had for a really long time. You and I both, people looked at us like we had 10 heads when we were talking about wholeness and holistic well-being almost 10 years ago. And but we prided ourselves in having this conversation. And I remember being the person going to these organizations and they're looking at me going, oh, and I'm talking about thoughts and feelings and hopes and dreams when it came to money. And then realizing that's ultimately, that is what people are that's what they feel, and that's what they want. And so it's now it's just this new level of awareness of the different aspects of ourselves and their interconnectivity, their intersectionality, and how they affect one another. And so for me, realizing, and I just want to give you like one last example, when I was going through my kind of transformation and realizing that I was repeating the same mistakes. I, instead of using titles and salaries, I was using influence venues to kind of determine. Now me going back and going, well, yeah, that's why my compass was broken, because it was pointing me to the same direction that I said I no longer wanted to work on. And that's when, seeing the different dimensions, I realized, okay, I'm strong on my happy work, my occupational health. I'm strong on my financial health. I'm strong on my social network. Well, what area is really, it really needs work on? And I was like, oh, okay, the deep rooted stuff that's affecting my mental and emotional well-being. And that's how, when things unraveled and I understood, and I just want to wrap this around from the top of this conversation, my true relationship with money. I didn't grow up with much. And eventually I got to a point where I became financially secure and independent. And coming from how I grew up, being first gen, it does impact you. And I looked at my parents' relationship with money and how that impacted me. My parents went through bankruptcy. My parents struggled, but they made sure we had food on the table. We had roof over their heads, but they never talked to me about money. There it might be a bit of shame, but also in the last few years, I uncovered why they were kind of messy, not kind of, they were messy with money. My dad, for instance, there were weeks where he did not know he would eat. I don't know if I've ever experienced a period of my life where I did not know I would have food to eat. And there were moments where my mom was unsure if the housing. So they were experiencing this form of poverty that I had never grown up in. And that their relationship with money. And so when they got access to other people's money credit, they're utilizing to kind of heal from that childhood trauma of no money. And that affected my relationship. And so for me, finally understanding my relationship with money is rooted in my parents and perhaps my grandparents' relationship, has allowed me to unravel the financial messiness and finally get to a place where I can enjoy the financial successes without the fear of overcompensating just to have the things that I don't necessarily even want. And so I wanted to share that because it has been an evolution, and the dimensions has helped me heal in this process. And I hope others can find that same.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that. And it's really important for people to hear this, I think, over and over again, that you can unravel and the stories and understand where they came from, and that you don't have to live in their shadows. It doesn't mean that it all goes away, that those imprints may be there for the rest of our lives, but the idea that you understand them, you can have compassion towards them, you can love these parts of yourself, make fun of them, which is what I'm really good at. I'm like, oh, good goodness, here we go again. I don't say, why should that be, that should be gone. I've written a book about this. I shouldn't have to deal with this. Like, those thoughts don't even enter my mind. I'm just like, oh, this is life. This is what happens. This is my own evolution. And I honor these things that my parents gave me that, yeah, I'd love to give them back, but they're here and I can live with them. And I make sure that my husband knows about them and we talk about them, and we don't give ourselves an undue pressure or hard time, too. Because I think there's also fear that if you uncover it and you can't get rid of it, then you're a bad person or you've done something wrong. And I found that that's not helpful either. It's like, build awareness, give yourself massive compassion. It sounds like your book is helping us to do that in new ways.
Yeah, no, I love that you share that in terms of like the emotions that rise up when we're thinking about our past situations. And this book really does address that in many ways. And in the happy heart section, which is emotional well-being, I talk about emotional health as emotional intelligence. It's not about just recognizing that you're in a state of fear, but it's assessing that fear and then managing the emotions that come out of that fear. And I think that is kind of what's been missing in a lot of the conversations when it comes around money and emotions. And so I think we see this a lot, right? It's like, oh, this is how I feel. This is exactly it. Take it or leave it. And I'm like, well, being able to express your emotions is one thing. Being able to assess, understand, and manage them is another. And I'm here to share how you can do those things versus just being overcome with these emotions, because it creates that state of living. We're constantly in a fight or flight mode. And if we're constantly living in that stress mode, eventually it's going to take a toll on our mental health. And that's where it becomes a diagnosable, clinical diagnosable issue. And then those things manifest itself physically. And then eventually, if you're someone that's striving and you've reached some goals that seem like big achievements, and you're seeing something is missing, then you're entering what I call the spiritual dimension, the happy spirit. And we can talk about that in another episode. But that's also when we talk about something is missing, and you gave that example, like what else? It could be that spiritual void. And I think, and that's that purpose, serving something greater than ourselves. And again, it's all connected and woven together in this beautiful tapestry. And I just want people to see their multi-dimensionality and how they can affect each of these areas, how they can lean into their strengths to be able to support an area that may need some strengthening.
It's so beautiful. So, Jason, we are so happy that you're here and sharing this with us today, getting the book Happy Money, Happy Life. And you spell your last name Vitug. And I don't even want to try. I probably would butcher it because I can't pronounce anything, but will you say it out loud and then everybody can hear it?
Yeah, Jason Vitug.
I want to say it right. Maybe I would have. Okay, it's all good. But we will put notes of, links, all those good things in the comments. And I want to encourage people to go and order the book. Amazon, it's going to be in bookstores, going to be all over the place. But we and shop local if possible. Order the book. It's okay. It might take a little bit of time if you go to your local bookstore and place that order, but we want to encourage you to do that as well. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you so much.